1.2b is on solving equations with variables. So again, we want to be able to rearrange an equation for a given variable. So we're still using inverse operations, and we are still trying to isolate the variable. You just have to start by figuring out what variable they want you to solve for. So we want to solve for the indicated variable. So we want to solve for c. So we have d plus c equals a, and it is our job to solve, in other words, isolate c. Well, if we want to solve for c, that means we have to move d to the other side of our equation. So we have a positive d. Anytime there's not a coefficient, in other words, a number in front of your variable, it means you have one of them. So we have 1d right here. So having the opposite of having positive 1d is having negative 1d. So we're going to subtract 1d, which again is the same as d, from both sides. Well, 1d minus 1d, or d minus d, just eliminates to 0, right? So you have one dog and you give your one dog away, you have 0 dogs left. Well, we have our positive c, we're just going to bring that down, bring our equal sign down. Notice how a and d, they are not like terms, so we can't combine them in any way, shape, or form. So when we can't combine them, we just write them. So we just have a, and then we have minus d. C is isolated, so our final answer is c equals a minus d. Again, notice how we're still using those same inverse operations, still isolating a variable. It's just we have a bunch of variables now instead of numbers. Let's look at another one. So we want to solve for the indicated variable. In this problem, our indicated variable is m. So we want to solve for m. So we have m times p equals k. Well, we are multiplying m by p. The opposite of multiplying by something is dividing. So we are going to divide by our variable p on both sides. Right? A variable divided by a variable is just 1. So this is just going to be m on our left-hand side. Bring down our equal sign. K divided by p, well, we can't simplify that at all, so we just leave it. I like these problems because you can't usually simplify, so there's a couple less steps usually. Which means m is equal to k divided by p, and that is our final answer. Now would be a good time to pause and see if you can solve this next one. We want to solve for x. So we have y equals m times x plus b. So this is going to have a few extra steps. So let's start by getting this b out of here. I'm going to subtract b from both sides. Well, y minus b, they are not like terms, so we can't actually subtract them. So we just have to leave them. Bring down our equal sign. We haven't changed our m times x at all, so that just stays. But plus b minus b eliminates to 0. Right? If you have one baseball and then you give your baseball away, you have 0 baseballs. Y minus b equals m times x. Well, the opposite of multiplying is still dividing, so let's go ahead and divide by m. Since we do it on one side, we have to do the same thing on the other. Notice how we have y minus b divided by m. None of these are like terms, so we can't simplify them at all. So we can just leave our answer like this. Y minus b divided by m equals x, which is the exact same thing as saying x equals y minus b divided by m. You can write it either of these ways. Notice how it's the same thing, we just flip to the sides around of our equation. So again, it doesn't matter which way you write it. Both of them are the same type of answer. If you really wanted, you could also write it as y divided by m minus b divided by m. Any of these are acceptable. Let's try a couple more. So we want to solve for b2. So we have a equals half times the quantity of b1 plus b2 times h. So there's a lot going on here. So let's just start by figuring out b2 is what we want to isolate. That's in our parentheses, so we're actually going to leave that for the last. But outside of our parentheses, we've got this multiply by half and multiply by h. So let's take care of those first. Well, the opposite of, or inverse of multiplying by a half, we could divide by a half, which is the exact same thing as multiplying by 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2 on both sides. So over here we have 2a equals, well, a half times 2 is just 1. So we have b1 plus b2 times h. Now let's move that h. Well, the opposite of multiplying by h is dividing by h. So we have 2a divided by h. We can't simplify that at all, so we just have to leave it as division. H divided by h, that's just 1. So really all we're left with over here is b1 plus b2. And since that's all that's left, we don't actually need to write these parentheses anymore. Well, we want to get that b2 all by itself. So our last step is to subtract b1 from both sides. Notice how on this left-hand side, none of these are like terms. So our final answer is just 2a divided by h minus b1 equals b2. And again, you could write that as b2 equals 2a divided by h minus b1. And that would be your final answer. So all we did, we just rearranged what we needed to until we got that b2 completely by itself. Now would be a good time to pause and try this last problem for yourself. So we have solve for b. Well, y equals 1/4 times pi times b times h. Notice how this is all multiplication. So basically you're going to have a lot of division in order to get b by itself. Well, let's start with this 1/4. If we want to turn this 1/4, or we want to change it to a 1, well, we could divide by 1/4. Dividing by 1/4 is the same as multiplying by 4. So I'm going to multiply by 4 on both sides. Again, if you divided by 1/4, you'd end up in the same place, so it doesn't matter how you do it. This is going to be 4y equals, well, 1/4 times 4. Okay, that just eliminates to 1. But we still have our pi, our b, and our h. So pi times b times h. Well, we're just multiplying, and we want to get b by itself. So to do that, we'll have to divide by pi, and we'll have to divide by h. So I'm going to turn this into one step. I could make it into 2 steps if I wanted, but I'm just going to turn it into 1 step. Well, notice that 4y divided by pi times h, there aren't any like terms there, so we just leave that as 4y divided by pi times h. And over on the right-hand side, pi divided by pi just eliminates to 1, h divided by h just simplifies to 1. So all that we're left with is b. And again, we can flip that around to be b equals 4 times y divided by pi times h. And that is our final answer. So when we are solving for our variable, solving for an indicated variable, again, you're still using inverse operations. You are still trying to isolate a variable. You just need to figure out what variable you're trying to isolate and then use those inverse operations to solve.